My brothers and sisters in Christ, today's first reading from the letter to the Hebrews contains another gentle admonishment towards us in our pursuit of holiness in the spiritual life, as it talks about the fact that in our sufferings, we have not yet come to the point of shedding our blood. In a sense, if you're watching this video, you have not yet been martyred, so to speak. And so we all experience sufferings of our own, both those that are undertaken voluntarily and those that are not voluntary. So our voluntary sufferings are those things that we suffer for others, the good deeds or kindness that we suffer out of love for others, or our ascetical practice, our acts of penance, our fasting, voluntary self-deprivation, abstinence from meat on Fridays during Lent. These things that we do in order to grow in devotion and grow in humility. But ultimately, there is a lot of suffering in life that's not of our choosing. Those are the things that befall us, whether our physical health or the death of a loved one, or a tragedy, or the loss of a job, or whatever it may be, or even just the everyday sufferings we experience. And in the spiritual life, we speak of suffering as a good. And St. Paul, in fact, very radically in language that's almost too intense for us to handle, speaks of his love, his desire for suffering. And that can seem very difficult for us on the road to holiness, because who likes suffering? In a sense, at face value, no one wants to suffer. But when Paul speaks of it, it can leave us in the question of, or as the letter to the Hebrews today suggests, the suffering that we're called, because it's a given in the spiritual life, there will be suffering. It's part of our human condition. As long as sin reigns in the flesh and in the world, there will be suffering. And so our choice in the spiritual life is what to do with that suffering. Suffering in and of itself doesn't make us holier. If I stub my toe in a minute, it'll hurt really bad, and that doesn't make me holier for having stubbed my toe. But the way we approach, the way we endure suffering is what can make a difference in the spiritual life. Suffering, a deprivation of body or mind or spirit, of anguish, is not fulfilling in any way unless it leads us to joining with Christ on the cross. And so when suffering comes upon me, whether one that I plan, an act of mortification, or when something unplanned befalls me, when I link the suffering that I am experiencing with closeness to Christ on the cross, then that becomes a path for holiness, for growth. As I realize that the thing that I'm suffering a deprivation of, and that's what suffering is, to suffer want of something is lacking. And when I do this, it can be a moment of realization that as much as I desire, or may even in the moment need this thing, I need the love of God the most. I'm united with Christ and letting go, foregoing another good to cling to the cross of Jesus Christ, the path of salvation. And so in this, suffering becomes a very blessed thing in the spiritual life when we embrace it consciously. It's not good just because we suffer it and endure it, but if it becomes a vehicle, a pathway to prayer, when in a sense we're emptied of ourself, our control, our pride, and our hurt, our lack is united in a more intimate way to the cross of Jesus Christ, then that becomes a profound door to sanctification. And so, for those of us either on the recording end or the watching end of this video, no, we have not yet suffered to the point of shedding our blood for the faith. And yet we know what it is to suffer, and we will continue to know what it is to suffer. But may we, especially as Lent approaches, learn to suffer well, to suffer more intentionally, and to suffer with Christ, who has suffered for us, that we may be one with him. May God bless you all.